Built in 1941 by the American Locomotive Company, when it was operated by the Union Pacific, it ran from 1941 to 1961, having traveled over 1 million miles in 20 years of service. Some performance numbers are a maximum speed of 80 miles an hour, 7,000 horsepower, and 138,000 pound-feet of tractive effort. It was rebuilt by the Union Pacific over a 3-year span from July 2016 to May 2019. It now roams the rails in the West as an Excursion locomotive. Built on May 20th, 1941 by the Lima Locomotive Works, Southern Pacific 4449, also known as Daylight, is now the only surviving example of a Southern Pacific GS4 class of 484 Northern. The Southern Pacific 4449 is interesting because it burns fuel oil instead of coal like a lot of other locomotives of the time. From August 1975 to December 1976, 4449 shared the duties with other steam locomotives pulling the American Freedom Train throughout the U.S. NNW 1218 was built by the NNW's own Roanoke shops in 1943. Some quick facts are a driver diameter of 70 inches, a locomotive weight of 573,000 pounds, and a maximum speed of 70 miles an hour. NNW 1218 is the only surviving 2664 steam locomotive in the world. After retirement, it served in the steam program along with 611 and 4501. 1218 now resides at the Virginia Museum of Transportation. Union Pacific 844, built by the American Locomotive Company on December 24, 1944, also known as the Living Legend, is a 484 Northern type steam locomotive operated by the Union Pacific as part of its heritage fleet. The wheelbase, the engine is 50 feet, and the engine and tender is 98 feet total. It had a former number of 8444. It was in the Greyhound scheme at one time, and it was rebuilt in 1959 to 1960. The NW 611 is the sole survivor of 14 J-class steam locomotives, designed and built by the Norfolk and Western Railway. The locomotive rolled out of Roanoke's East End shops in 1950. It is also known as the Spirit of Roanoke and the Queen of Steam. It had 2 rebuilds, one October 1981 and July 1982, and June 2014 to March 2015. NNW 611 is still in operation today, running at Strasburg, Pennsylvania. It also served in the Southern Steam program. Southern Railway 630 is a Class KS1 282 consolidation type steam locomotive built in February 1904 by the Richmond Works of the American Locomotive Company for the Southern Railway. It had a rebuild in 1917. After being retired by the Southern, it was purchased back to run on the Southern Steam program in the 60s, 70s, and 80s with 4501. The 630 is still owned by TVRM, or the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, with 4501. The Nickel Plate 759 was built as an S2 Berkshire in August of 1944 for the New York, Chicago, and St. Louis Road, or the Nickel Plate. After its retirement from pulling fast freights on the Nickel Plate, it was purchased by Steamtown in Scranton. Then it was leased to Ross Rowland for the American Golden Spike Limited. Then, over the winter, it was stored in a D&H roundhouse where they neglected to drain the boiler, causing the locomotive's inevitable retirement. The Southern Railway's 4501 is a preserved MS Class 282 Mikado built in October 1911 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was the first of its wheel arrangement type for the Southern Railway. It ran steam excursions for the Southern Railway in the 70s, 80s, and up until the 90s until the merger with Norfolk Southern. It was added to the National Register of Historical Places on March 28, 1979. It is currently owned and operated by TVRM. The Reading T1 is a class of 484 Northern type steam locomotives owned by the Reading Railroad. They were rebuilt from 30 I-10SA Class 280 consolidation type locomotives between 1945 and 1947. Out of the 30 rebuilt, 4 survive in preservation today, those being 2100, 2101, 2102, and 2124. There were a total of 30 rebuilt by the Baldwin Locomotive Works. The 4 that were preserved were in special excursions by the Reading Railroad called the Reading Rambles in the 60s. And in the 70s, 2101 was the American Freedom Train, and later the Jesse Steam Special. 2101 was in a roundhouse fire in the late 70s, causing it to be beyond repair. It was cosmetically restored and donated to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum. 2100 was sold off and ran for a few more years into the 90s before it was retired. There are plans to restore at least 2 out of the remaining 4 Reading T1s. Nickel Plate Road 587 is a 282 type USRA Light Mikado steam locomotive built in September 1918 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works for the Lake Erie and Western Railroad as number 5541. Later, the Nickel Plate bought it and changed a couple things for their railroad. It ran a bit in preservation and now is plans to restore it. The Nickel Plate Road 765 is a S2 Class 284 Berkshire steam locomotive built for the New York, Chicago, and St. Louis Railroad. It was built in 1944 by the Lima Locomotive Works. It's currently operated by the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society and running all over the Midwestern U.S. It had a rebuild from 2000 to 2006. It commonly runs on the short line Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad, as seen in this picture here, where many people can ride behind a real steam engine. Though I do believe it will have to go back under for another restoration soon, as its 15-year time is almost up. There's many places on social media where you can see this locomotive. This locomotive also participated in Norfolk Southern's 21st Century Steam program. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Now remember, this is all just my opinions, so don't take anything too seriously. Thanks!